Once again, welcome to your first presentation with IBAC, and please begin.
Okay, Christina, wouldn't you start?
Okay, thank you. Dear colleagues, we represent the FNP team, and we did a study on ethical problems of raw materials, extraction, and methods of solving them. And so let's get started. Well, recent technological advances are creating new market for high-tech goods and allowing them to grow steadily. Such markets are essential to global economic growth, but that growth is fueled by raw materials, and their extraction is increasing. Metals are considered the most important, and that's why mining industry is so important for the global economy. However, research shows that it's also notorious for ethical controversies. Mining industry's negative impact is closely linked to extraction, while relatively simple supply chains make it easier to draw conclusions about the industry's impact. That's why we decided to focus our research on the mining industry. Mining has severe negative social environmental impact. Today, laws are being passed to minimize it, for example, such as the Dodd-Frank Act in the US. But it's still mostly legal to obtain metals from ethically questionable sources. And that's why the negative impact of mining remains high. It's made of individual impacts of all the materials extracted, and because our primary goal is to reduce the overall negative impact of mining as much as possible. Most pressing ethical problems to solve are related to very material and that have a significant share in the supply chain and is involved in many ethically controversial situations. Therefore, we decided that the best way to help the mining industry improve its ethical condition is to, at first, define the material with a large enough share in the industry, assess the existing ethical problems of its extraction, assess the effectiveness of existing measures, propose new corporate policies to effectively solve problems, and provide ethical and financial justification for the proposed measures. Sergey, your floor.
Thank you, Christina. So why do we believe that copper is the most ethically important sector of the mining industry? On the one hand, copper makes up a large part of supply chains, so copper is basically used in every computer, TV, or cell phone. On the other hand, copper is associated with several serious ethical problems in environmental and social areas. So the large scale of copper mining makes these problems even more important. That's why the ethical problems of copper mining are the most urgent to address. We have proposed a complex set of solutions which will improve existing corporate ESG measures, therefore reducing the frequency and scale of ethical problems in copper mining industry, and at the same time financially paying off. So ethical issues in copper mining can be divided into three broad groups according to the ESG framework: environmental, social, and governance ones. There are several examples of environmental problems associated with copper mining. So, for example, Chile has always been famous for its copper mining industry, and nowadays it intensified oil refining to meet the growing Chinese demand. But copper refining comes at a price. The Chiquicamata mine, located in the Atacama Desert, has polluted the area so badly that the producer, Codelco Corporation, has been forced to relocate employees and their families 70 kilometers away. While the desert itself doesn't have much biodiversity to be affected, the environmental problems are dangerous for the human health. Chiquicamata was built as a town for 25,000 people, but it had to be completely abandoned because of the extreme pollution. The mine certainly supports the local economy, it provides jobs and so on, but the abandonment of the entire town and the health problems should be seen as a serious threat to local prosperity, which is outweighing the good done. Environmental violations also occur in Myanmar. The Letpadang copper mine is located in a flood-prone area, and if copper waste leaks into the water, an environmental disaster is inevitable. In 2015, a toxic waste spill leaked into the fields of a local village, destroying all the crops. The government didn't release any information about the health risks, but the danger was obvious. Such a lack of information clearly violates the ethical principle of transparency. Moreover, in developing countries such as Myanmar, crop destruction can lead to malnutrition or even famine, outweighing any economic benefits. Myanmar can also be an example of social problems. According to the Amnesty International reports, the owner of the Letpadang mine, One Bao Mining, is threatening locals with forced evictions to expand the mine. As of 2016, the eviction plan has been suspended following protests, but the company still intends to complete it. The locals live in constant fear of eviction, which is certainly detrimental to the social well-being of the area and clearly violates the principle of justice. Another international NGO, Human Rights Watch, published a report on the social problems of copper mining in Zambia. It described a situation around Chinese-owned copper mines, where local workers were severely mistreated. Poor working conditions and human rights abuses are a real threat to workers' well-being and a violation of principle of fairness, while anti-union actions violate freedom of association and therefore pose a threat to Zambian democracy. Governance issues also threaten the ethical image of copper mining. For example, in 2007, the Chinese company MCC signed an agreement with the Afghan government to build a copper mine near the ancient city of Mes Aynak. Officially, MCC was going to move the entire city to another location, but archaeologists and civil society activists were sure that the deal was a case of corruption and that MCC was actually going to destroy the city, which is an important archaeological site. The process was paused in 2017, but Western news outlets still assume that MCC's interests include Mes Aynak. Such actions increase the level of corruption in the country and threaten the national cultural heritage, which is ethically unacceptable and also violates the principle of transparency. Sometimes cases of corruption are disguised as joint ventures, but that doesn't make them any less dangerous. In 2021, for example, the Canadian company Ivanhoe Mines Ltd signed a deal with Widia Chimanga, a high-ranking government official in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Ivanhoe would give Chimanga 20% of the shares in a new copper mine in exchange for protecting the company during negotiations with the DRC government, so-called special treatment. Such situations are ethically unacceptable because a bribe can make the deal acceptable to the government if it doesn't meet safety criteria. This can lead to catastrophic incident in the future, which is dangerous to society and unfair to other competitors in the market. Therefore, we can say that ethical problems in the copper mining industry exist in many areas, and they can have a negative impact on the environment, society, and government in the mining area or the entire country. So these problems are so urgent to solve because they violate key ethical principles like fairness, transparency, and justice, and they can have devastating consequences for local residents, employees, environment, especially wildlife, state integrity, and overall social prosperity. And that's why our research is aimed at proposing appropriate solutions to these problems. Sometimes companies try to solve ethical problems or at least limit their negative impact, but our corporate efforts always enough. So when the Chiquikamata mine became an environmental hazard, Codelco invested large sums in environmental safety. This certainly reduced the negative impacts of mining, but it was clearly not enough. The mine still remains a clear environmental hazard. This solution doesn't outweigh the damage done, and therefore we consider it unsuccessful. The environmental and social problems in Myanmar weren't solved at all. So the company Wanbao just sided with the government to suppress the spread of any information about incidents. The company tried to hold talks with the local people, but the compromise still wasn't reached, and Wanbao Mining simply used state force to crack down on the protesting locals. Such harsh measures are clearly unfair to the locals and completely unethical. The situation in Zambia wasn't much better. Local authorities and Chinese management tried to suppress worker dissent, but after the release of the archery report, they began negotiations. Working hours were reduced and anti-union action stopped. However, these measures weren't enough. Health and safety risks remained high, and Chinese supervisors continued to mistreat workers. The consequences of the ethical problems forced the company to reduce its negative impact, but the measures remained disproportionate to the damage done. Corruption cases in Afghanistan and the DRC show that companies can solve such problems on their own. Mes Aynak was saved because the key negotiator on the Chinese side was accused of corruption and expelled from the Chinese Communist Party, while the Ivanhoe deal with Chimanga was cancelled because the latter was arrested by DRC law enforcement. So problems were at least partially solved because the state intervened. But what would happen if it stayed aside? So these examples show that copper mining companies involved in ethical controversies try to hide or reduce the negative impact, but the damage remains significant and ethical principles are still violated. But what would do market leaders, large companies with strong ESG policies? Will they be more effective in addressing those controversies? We decided to explore these questions using the example of the large mining company Nornickel, which is one of the world's largest producers of metals and copper in particular. So Nornickel complies with the ESG framework and publishes annual reports on the measures taken. So we studied companies' ESG documents to answer the question, what will they do to solve such problems, and will it be enough? So let's start with the problem of the continuous pollution of the environment. Nornickel is taking various measures to reduce it, from the development of a special strategy and conducting an environmental analysis of each new project, to using independent environmental control and spending funds to repair damage. So the next environmental problem is accidental pollution. We'll analyze Nornickel policy in area using the example of the accident at CHPP3, the largest environmental disaster in northern Siberia in recent years. So Nornickel should have carried out preventive work to prevent the disaster, but when the accident happened, they spent a total of $1.7 billion to reduce the environmental impact. In addition, the company has developed and implemented a system of real-time monitoring of the condition of the foundation in the Norilsk industrial area, NIA, to prevent similar accidents. So Nornickel doesn't have a specific policy on such social ethical issues as the protection of local communities near its mines, but it has taken some measures to support the prosperity of Norilsk, the key city of the northern Siberian mining industry, to develop local infrastructure and to support the indigenous minorities culture. The company is taking steps to implement its well-developed policy against labor rights violations and to protect their employees even after their retirement. Next, Nornickel takes action to prevent ethical governance problems, especially corruption. Measures in this area vary from development of regulatory framework to employee screening and anti-corruption hotline. Therefore, we consider Nornickel's policy on ethical issues to be comprehensive and well-developed. It covers almost all possible areas of the ESG framework, so violations are more likely to be prevented or effectively resolved. Of course, other market leaders' ESG policies are better than those of the smaller companies, but are they fully sufficient to combat possible ethical problems? So the current policy of Nornickel includes many useful measures, but some potential problems still can be solved within the existing framework. The condition of the industrial facilities is monitored for Norilsk, but not for other facilities, which means that copper mines can cause more damage in the future. Another example of shortcomings is that most of the work of the environment seems to be done on paper. According to the media, the issues of the environment are mainly reflected in the company's reports, so the environmental damage isn't actually outweighed by measures. Existing social policy is also extensive and developed, but we suppose it has its flaws too. So the rights of small peoples are formally respected, but are actually trampled sometimes. Russian news agency Interfax reported in 2021 that the Aboriginal Forum, organization of indigenous peoples in Russia, urged Elon Musk not to buy non-nickel metals until company's 2018 strategy of relations with locals will change. Despite the protest, it hasn't been changed. Such treatment of indigenous peoples is cruelly unjust and unethical. Another example of social policy shortcomings is the fact that occupational safety and health are still at risk. For example, in 2021, the lethal accident happened at the Norilsk concentrator because of the gross violation of safety regulations. This accident suggests that there were insufficient efforts to ensure industrial safety. The existing policy to prevent ethical problems in management and governance is also diverse and developed, but not flawless. For example, Nornickel, despite its declared anti-corruption principles, retains corruption risks in top management. So, in fact, there are no formal requirements for the members of the board of directors. That clearly violates the principle of transparency. Therefore, using Nornickel as an example, we can conclude that copper market leaders with well-developed ESG policies are more likely to successfully prevent and resolve ethical issues, but their solutions often fall short, and they still violate some key ethical principles. So, the ethical problems mentioned above have manifested themselves in several countries: Zambia, Chile, and the DRC. We don't consider the problems in Afghanistan and Myanmar due to political instability. We already know that companies haven't been able to prevent or solve such problems, but perhaps the state has developed a sufficient legal framework to solve such problems on its own. So let's start with the Zambian legal framework for business ethics. First, the environmental regulations. They state that exploration and mining always have a negative environmental impact. They seek to ensure environmental compliance and state the mining in protected areas will only be licensed if rehabilitation of wildlife is guaranteed. Nevertheless, some small-scale mines operate without licenses. Mining companies aren't always required to fund biodiversity conservation, and carbon tax funds aren't ring-fenced, so this money can be used for unrelated purpose. Turning to the social area of Zambian business ethics, it's important to note that Zambian law prohibits all the worst forms of child labor, but gaps in the law make it difficult to adequately protect children from other forms. Zambian law also addresses governance issues, so it criminalizes all forms of corruption and sets a legal framework against financial crimes. However, Zambian authorities, public officials are not subject to financial disclosure laws. Moreover, according to the Transparency International, Zambia has a low corruption perception index, which means that the laws are unlikely to be fully implemented in practice. So let's move on to Chilean laws. In terms of environmental compliance, Chile's legal framework includes general principles. It establishes government environmental agencies and approves the regulations of the environmental impact assessment system. Regarding social issues, relevant regulations both individual and collective workers' rights. It promotes the inclusion of persons with disabilities. It provides for social insurance against occupational hazards and gives indigenous peoples the right to participate in consultation with companies. Key regulations in governance area establish financial intelligence units and regulate the criminal liability of legal entities. Thus, the Chilean legal framework for business ethics is well developed, but it still has some problems. So one of the main challenges is the absence of any legal stimulus for companies to implement ESG measures, which aren't required by law, but are compliant to the business ethics. So let's move on to the legal framework of the DRC. Environmental business ethics are regulated by several laws, which outline the principles of environmental protection, make industrial facilities subject to prior authorization, establish pollution tax, set up a framework for the procedures of obtaining permits, and require mining companies to submit an environmental impact studies. Legal framework on social issues recently removed the ban on women working night shifts, but it still allows pregnant women to suspend their employment contract. It prohibits discrimination on the different basis and outlaws slavery and forced labor. It also states that the forced eviction is an abuse. Corporate governance issues are also addressed by several laws, which contains requirements for financial institutions relating to the due diligence system, such as know your client, and criminalize all forms of corruption. In practice, however, these laws don't work because of the extremely high level of corruption. The DRC has one of the lowest corruption perception index scores in the world. Moreover, corruption problems in the country have worsened over the past year. Therefore, national laws usually implement some measures that should enforce business ethics. However, there are some common problems that limit their ability to address ethical problems. Some laws don't really work because of high levels of corruption. Environmental laws are often inadequate to actually finance environmental restoration. Some laws also rarely support corporate action to implement ESG frameworks, and sometimes national laws simply don't meet the demands of modern business ethics. So we can conclude that existing legal measures aren't enough to close the gaps in corporate ESG policies, and that's why the industry needs new solutions that it can implement without government intervention. So we have compiled a short list of issues that remain pressing for copper mining currently. They include condition monitoring of industrial facilities isn't actually universal. Environmental policies are implemented ineffectively and slowly. Local people's rights may be abused. Safety regulations aren't enforced well enough, and mechanisms for electing or appointing top company officials may be untransparent. Companies may use corruption schemes to avoid compliance with the law. Legal regulations don't outweigh the environmental damage. Laws don't create incentives for companies to comply with the ESG framework, and sometimes laws simply don't conform to general business ethics of the modern world. So our team offers a solution to each of these problems that can be implemented by a company even without government support, which can be absent in developing countries. Irad, I'm passing it to you.
Thank you. We'll start by improving the condition monitoring of industrial facilities. We're proposing a plan to implement the online monitoring system on every single facility without exception. This will help us to solve problems caused by monitoring some facilities and missing others, thus reducing downtime and financial losses from routine and emergency repairs, which makes it financially acceptable, and significantly reducing the probability of environmental accidents, which is clearly ethical. Such a monitoring system will also increase workplace safety, which will reduce harm done to the employees. Problems such as ineffective implementation of environmental policies and the lack of incentives to implement ESG measures can be solved by introducing a system of bonuses for meeting ethical requirements. Such bonuses will be awarded to the members of top-level corporate governance bodies who are responsible for the company's ESG development. Non-bonus wages should be significantly reduced, and the amount of bonus will be proportional to the extent of the measures implemented. Such bonuses will be funded by the money saved by the company because of faster ESG development. For example, money saved from reducing carbon tax payments because of reducing the carbon footprint. Such a measure will help the company reduce the harm done to the society and environment and will be fair to the management. The non-transparent mechanism of electing or appointing top company officials can be improved by developing new regulations on the board of directors, which will specify requirements for candidates. The document should be placed on the company's website. One of the main requirements would be to take an ESG course from an independent organization, pass an exam, and signed an ethics agreement that obliges the board member to comply with the company's ethical standards. Such a measure will put the principle of transparency into practice, which will significantly increase the ethicality of companies. The rights of locals can be protected by hiring a permanent observer from the ESG auditing firm to mediate any conflicts between locals and the company. The observer will submit an annual report to the board of directors on any ongoing conflicts so that the board can intervene. The company can also send its representatives to local communities to reduce the frequency of conflicts. Such measures will help the company to treat local people more fairly and equitably. Such Such measures in some countries with high levels of corruption, companies may try to avoid compliance with the law by using corruption schemes. For example, local subsidiaries of the company may bribe law enforcement officials, which is devastating for corporate transparency. We suppose that the corporation should assign special employees, law enforcement relations specialists, to each local subsidiary. They will report only to the board of directors, and they will be given an exclusive authority to contact law enforcement and financial intelligence agencies in the country where the subsidiary is located. Therefore, the local subsidiary itself will not be allowed to contact law enforcement, and such contacts will only be made by fully trusted specialists who are considered to be corruption-proof. This measure will significantly increase corporate transparency, which is important for an ethical image. Proposed measure can be even more effective, but it requires long-term efforts. The company can initiate the establishment of the Anti-Corruption Association in the mining industry and convince market leaders to join in. This will unify the anti-corruption policies and significantly reduce the number of corruption cases, thus contributing to market transparency. If national regulations don't require sufficient measures to outweigh the environmental damage, companies should increase their environmental spending on their own. We propose the following. The company undertakes to spend no less on environmental remediation than it would pay in environmental taxes in the country where it is headquartered. Such countries are usually developed and the environmental taxes are high. The difference between the amount calculated in this way and the environmental taxes actually paid in the country of operation will be spent on environmental charity. This measure will partially pay for itself financially, since such costs can be considered when calculating tax deductions in most countries. It also will outweigh the environmental damage caused by mining. In some countries, laws simply don't align with universal business ethics. For example, national laws may not support diversity in the workplace or social protections for women and minorities. In such countries, companies should adapt diversity and protection requirements that are enforced by the laws of the country where the company is headquartered. It is the unlikely event that this country doesn't have such laws as well. The company should at least comply with minimum ESG requirements and make efforts to increase such compliance over time. This will help the company to treat its employees in a more fair, just, and equal way, which is certainly ethical. Let's move on to describing the financial impact of the proposed solutions. It is important to understand that the impact of ESG initiatives on the company's financial position is often very indirect. ESG typically does not directly generate cash flows, but contributes to increasing the company's efficiency. The implementation of the facilities monitoring system, new community engagement mechanisms, and the ethical bonus system will generate large revenues compared to its cost. Increasing board transparency and hiring law enforcement relations specialists won't be so profitable, but it will still pay off. Establishing the Anti-Corruption Association of Mining Industries in a longer-term investment and won't generate sufficient revenue in the first 2 years, but over 5 years, it will pay off too. Increasing our environmental spending through charity can only pay for itself due to the specifics of the cash flow generated by tax deductions. However, the company will be able to increase its ESG rating and attractiveness to investors. In total, these initiatives will generate more than $150 million over 5 years at a cost of $100 million, giving us a net profit of $50 million. Over 5 years, at a risk rate of 3.6%, the NPV of the initiatives will be $35 million. and the IRR will be 14.91%. And the return of investment will be 51.14%, which proves the profitability of the measures. The payback period of all proposed measures will be at least 9.96 years, and the WACC will be 5.24%. The initiatives can provide this level of profitability, and there will be no problems in attracting funding. So, copper mining is very profitable and essential for high-tech markets, but it is associated with several ethical problems in different areas. Small companies operating in developing countries take limited steps to mitigate the negative impact of these problems, but they're usually not enough to offset the damage they do to the environment, workers, and locals. Larger companies with well-developed ESG policies are more likely to prevent or resolve such problems, but even their policies are flawed. Governments establish legal frameworks to address such problems, but laws are often flawed or circumvented, meaning that ethical principles such as justice, equality, transparency, and fairness are still more or less violated. That's why we propose a complex set of measures, generally based on the experience of Nickel's current ESG policy and aimed at improving it, but also suitable for other copper mining companies. Such measures require investment, but in the medium and long term, they will pay off financially and significantly improve the company's ethical image. After implementation of those initiatives, the company's efforts will outweigh the damage done, while key ethical principles will be fully implemented. I assume that it is all that we wanted to say on this topic. On this slide, you can see our contacts. So if we won't answer some of your questions, you can contact us via Telegram or email. And of course, thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. We certainly appreciate that. Now we, as a board, have some questions for you that we'd like you to ask. And it would be nice if we could hear from a mix of you from all three during our Q&A session. My first question for you is this. If you take a look at our mission statement on our website, it says our mission is to supply the world with non-ferrous metals efficiently and safely. And then it goes on to break down into a number of words, as you've seen. These words include reliability, responsibility, honoring our commitments, efficiency, growth, professionalism, and collaboration. Which of your recommendations affect these, for your recommendations, which of these 6 words do you feel that you are operating on the most as they fit into our mission? And please take your slides down.
Put our slides down. Okay.
So there we go.
Talking about 6 key principles. The main issues, the main principles of that we focused on is efficiency, I suppose, because all of our measures will pay off or even more, generate additional cash flows. And I assume that the second most important principles of our work is safety, because all of our initiatives are aimed to increasing work safety, to increasing to reducing corruption cases and so on. If you would repeat these key principles, perhaps I would answer. Perhaps I would give you more information on this topic.
Let's move on to our next judge. Jessica or
yeah,
Greg,
I can jump in.
Jessica.
Yeah, thank you. So one of my questions is, it's a tough sell to ask an organization to increase environmental spending on their own, right? You suggested that as one of sort of your conclusory principles toward the end, that you know, there are certain ESG efforts and environmental spending that's not necessarily required, but that we should do. So how can you give me just a little bit more convincing of this? I know that one of the benefits of this would be that employees would be treated better. Maybe there's some reputational impacts. But for me, that was one of the aspects that was a bit of a tough sell in terms of why we would just sort of spend more without much of a business case for the why. And I'm wondering if you can tell me more about why we should consider that as a board.
So we'll answer the question. Thank you, Ms. Drowsky. So we suppose that increasing spending would be not only ethical by obvious reasons, but also in some way profitable to the company, because it will attract some reputation increases. It can be listed as tax exemptions in many different countries when we spend more money on environmental charity. And we also suppose that such spending can prevent environmental accidents in future. So, for example, when Nornickel was combating an incident and the CHPP3, they spent almost $2 billion to combat it. But if they've done some preemptive work, it would only cost something like $20 million, nothing more. So we suppose that voluntarily spending a little more money for environmental causes nowadays can save our reputation tomorrow. So we suppose that such reasons are enough to increase spending, even if laws don't require us to do that. Thank you.
If you allow us to turn on our presentation again, we would show you our financial model where all those issues that Mrs. Drewski, if you allow us to
yeah, that would be great actually, because I have a question. I have a question about the financial models.
Okay.
That'd be great if you put that slide up. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks.
Sure. Let's do that.
There it is. Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we have 3 slides where the main parts of our model are shown. In this slide, you can see the revenue generated by all the initiatives per year in US dollars. On this slide, you can see the costs that we will have to undertake to implement our initiatives. And in this slide, you will see the profit that the company will receive after implementing such initiatives. Perhaps you wanted to see an Excel file.
No, this is perfect. I think what I'm getting at is the second to bottom line that says spend no less on environmental remediation, right? Where we aren't actually remediating because this model saves us a lot of money. However, we're still choosing to give money back on top of everything else that we're doing. That's the part that I'm just challenging a little bit in terms of whether that's actually required. So this model helps me see it, but it also shows that there's no concrete profit associated with it.
Yes, as it was mentioned before, these initiatives don't generate cash flows directly due to the specifics of tax deductions in most of the countries, but it will still increase our reputation and attractiveness to investors, as Sergey said.
Thank you.
May I ask a question?
Please, Greg.
Yeah, my question is, how do the bonuses create revenue? That just seems counterintuitive to me. It seems like paying bonuses is obviously an expense. So how can it create revenue to have this bonus structure?
Yes, thank you. if you don't mind, I will answer this question. As it was said before, the money we get from these initiatives, we will get from various bonuses granted to us by our state. For example, tax deductions, maybe, or perhaps the decreased amounts of auditing events. And Sagi, could you please
Yes,
answer the question?
so some countries allow us to receive some subsidies or more cheap loans if we are complying with ESG requirements. And also this measure will be profitable because, as we have said before, bonuses will be paid while we are significantly reducing non-bonus wages. So ESG directors from the boards of directors will receive less actual wage and more bonuses. So they will earn more than they earn nowadays if they are efficient, if they are implementing ESG measures in effective way. But if they fail to comply with our ESG strategy, with our deadlines for meeting ESG requirements, they will be paid less than they are paid nowadays. So it's not actually about only adding bonuses, it's about converting wage to bonuses.
If you
Okay.
would,
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead, Greg, are you?
Oh, I just had one question just on terminology. Being a board member, we get a lot of acronyms, initials for phrases thrown at us, and I don't keep up with them as well as I should. One of the slides mentioned low CPI scores. I'm just not familiar with the term CPI.
Oh, it's Corruption Perception Index,
Okay.
performed by
Corruption
Transparency
perception. Okay.
International.
Because in the US, we talk about consumer price index, and I knew that wasn't what you were talking about, but okay, thank you.
Can you go to the slide? It's very near the slide you just showed with it had the vertical line and then some bars to the right of it.
Okay, I understand. I'll do it
Slide.
in a few seconds.
Sure.
So you wanted to discuss our financials.
There we go. Yes, thank you. What I'm a little unclear on is where you got these numbers. They're certainly interesting and impressive, but as I look at some of these, I'm not quite sure I understand where did you get the data or what assumptions did you make with the data?
Of course. Talking about industrial monitoring, we've searched the internet and found some prices for special continuous monitoring for special online continuous monitoring system. In fact, they cost approximately $40,000 or more. So we assume that in years the prices will be higher due to the inflation, and we calculated the saved time on routine and emergence repairs, and we added the revenue generated during 1 hour of working of an average copper mining company to possible cash flows. Did that answer your question on industrial monitoring?
Let's look at undertaking diversity. Where did you get those numbers?
Undertaking diversity. This is a really good question. Talking about this, we've conducted, we've read some researches about how diversity affects the efficiency of corporate management, and knowing this information and knowing how much money does the average copper mining company generates per 1 hour, we've received this number. Moreover, we wanted to say that complying with these ESG requirements increases demand in Western countries, for example, United States or Germany, or and so on. We know that there is a trend for Western companies to hold
I think I know what you're talking about.
No,
You're talking
no, no, no.
about supply chain, holding their
Yes,
supply
yes,
chain
I know.
accountable for
I'm
doing
talking
that.
about supply chain. These company, so Western companies now are prone to hold collaboration with with counterparties which do not meet, who don't meet special ESG requirements. So knowing this and knowing that we will definitely comply with these requirements and we will continue our collaboration, we added these average cash flows to our model. Did that answer your question?
Let me, Jessica?
Yeah, thank you. So I have a question in terms of whether you considered an approach for us to maybe single out certain countries where some of these things are more of an issue in terms of, you know, monitoring or maybe not necessarily bonuses, but places where new regulation is more likely or legal enforcement is more likely. Did you consider an approach at all where you thought about specifically the countries where we operate and breaking down the model in that way? Or was there a particular reason you did not do that analysis as part of this?
Jessica, Ms. Zavsky, excuse me, please, you can repeat your question just in brief, because I didn't hear you very well.
Did you at all consider making recommendations specific to countries that have higher risk with regard to legal action or enforcement action? Or did you always approach this as sort of a holistic government model, governance model that spans across all of our operations? Would there be any reason for me to be concerned that we don't just zero in on certain countries that have risk, for example, versus implementing this across the board? Okay, let me try it one more time. What if we just applied this model in a couple of our highest risk countries? Would that make a difference instead of us rolling this out across the company?
Okay. Now we understand your question. Thank you. On this slide, you can see a list of countries where the top copper mining countries. As you can see, there are Peru, there are Democratic Republic of Congo, there are Indonesia, there are Zambia, Mexico, Kazakhstan, and so on. Assuming that our strategy is based on NoNickel's ESG reports and ESG strategies, and you know, Russia is very far from fully implementing ESG requirements, from fighting corruption and so on. We propose these measures for the companies in practically every country that is participated in copper extraction. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it's helpful to see this chart. Thank you.
Greg, did you have one more question?
No, I mean, I just have, I guess my question is like, how is our competition addressing this? Because obviously we're in a global competitive market, and obviously a lot of these problems are are a result of profits. I mean, people are cutting corners on, the environmental and social aspects of the business so they can save money and generate more profits for their shareholders. So what's our competition doing? Because I think it'd be easier to sell this to the rest of our board if we can show that if we don't make a change, we're going to be competitively disadvantaged.
Yes, Mr. Meyer, thank you for your question. So I think that the most important aspect of implementing such measures is that we will increase our ESG score. So if we are conducting any deals with Western companies, with Western states, so we need to have a high ESG rating, because there were many cases when Western companies tried to boycott companies from the third world that were trying to cut the corners on ESG measures, and which were trying, for example, to corrupt governments of developing countries and so on. We also suppose that Western countries can pass some laws in future, maybe in nearest future, which will try to combat such problems like governance ones. So we have said about Dodd-Frank Act in the United States, which forces companies to disclose the source of 4 key metals. But for example, such act can be passed in US or in the European Union about copper in recent years. And if we will be ready to disclose where is our copper is going from, so is it really ethical? It will save us a large amount of time and money in the future. And if we're talking about immediate effects, so I think we will just increase our ESG score. And when we are attracting investors, ESG score is one of the most significant points which Western investors look to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sergey. Could we lower the PowerPoint slides? We don't need them right now. Okay, very good. Thank you. We're going to take off our judges' hats right now. We're going to take off our board member hats, I should say. We are now just your judges, and you are now students. We'd like to give you some feedback, and maybe if you choose, you can implement some of this into your 10-minute or 90-second, but there's no expectations that you do. Just a piece from me. You obviously did a ton of work on this, and the amount of information that you presented was quite amazing. Now, what I want to follow that up with is that if you were to give me as a board member a written document that had that information in it, I would be poring over it and reading it very closely. But when you offer the same information in a presentation, you need to figure out how much can people really take in. You can't just push out as much information as you want, hoping that your audience will get it. You need to choose and cut back on information so that you hit only the high points. And if you're fortunate enough to have a situation where there is a paper that you can hand out along with it, you can refer people to there for more information, but just be careful how much information that you put in a presentation. Number 2, as you saw, I'm a little stuck on your assumptions that you made on that one slide. And the minute I saw it, I thought, and so will other board members and other corporations, the minute I saw it, I thought, where did they get that information from? And I think you need to be much clearer on that, where you got it from. And you can even put it on the slide itself. And there were a number of assumptions there that if those assumptions did not come true, things would be quite different. So you'll want to talk about what is the sensitivity of your model. Sensitivity meaning how much can individual pieces be affected by one piece not coming to fruition or being affected by the outside, being affected somehow by the outside world. So just be careful with numbers. Let people know where you got them. It's okay to make assumptions, just be very clear. But again, I thought you gave a lot of wonderful information and really did enjoy the presentation. Jessica?
Thank you. One positive of the amount of information that you shared is when I was asking questions in the Q&A area, you gave a very confident response and had something relatively on point in the appendix. So I just want to say find that balanced approach of how much is too much to use in the presentation itself, while still being prepared to either speak to it or have it in appendix. So I think finding that balance is an art, and I just push you to think about that, because it did give me some reassurance as a board member that when I asked, for example, a country by country question, you're able to pull up a country by country slide that is, relevant. So I did appreciate that, and I thought you did a good job speaking confidently to the Q&A portion. So nice work on that. The other thing that I'd want to point out here is about how broad you're being about sort of these are issues that the industry faces versus specifically these are issues that our company is facing. So for example, I would know if I was on the board, but just today, I don't know if all of the countries you're listing all of these problems for are actually where we operate, or if you're pointing out more an issue about the industry. So I think just being clear when you are pointing out the multitude of issues, are you more pointing a finger at the industry? And if so, could you differentiate us a little bit and maybe give us a little bit of a pat on the back as we go, so it doesn't completely feel like, oh my gosh, why are we even in this business, right? Because we just started with so many issues that as a board member, I'd sort of be sitting here a little bit offended about, well, this is part of our industry, and this is all stuff that we generally know about, and now you're just making it even worse, right? So I think just point out the slivers of hope in where we as a company are doing better, so that we don't walk away from the first 1/3, 2/3 of your presentation feeling like, where do we even go from here, right? So just get a little bit more specific as to our particular company versus industry problems. And I think that would help me feel like as a board member, I can take a little bit more action and not just feel overwhelmed.
Thank you, Jessica. Greg?
Yeah, I have more sort of just very mechanical feedback. First of all, you all did a wonderful job presenting and, bringing up slides and answering our questions. Just overall, great presentation. Great command of the technology, which I personally struggle with a lot. I would say, Sergey, a couple things. I think you need to slow down. I noticed you were speaking very quickly, and sometimes it was hard to understand just because not that your English wasn't perfect, but you just were speaking so quickly. So I would just say slow down. It's something I struggle with also when I'm presenting. As you can see, I'm talking kind of fast myself. It's very difficult. You just got to breathe and just remember to slow down. The other thing is your camera angle, Sergey. If you would lift your camera or laptop, we feel like we're looking up at you. And again, this is very, technical stuff, but I think your presentation would be more just easier to follow if we were looking at your face instead of kind of at your chin, so to speak. And that's really it. I think overall, great job. I'm really impressed. And again, thanks. And the slides were very, very polished, I thought.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I really enjoyed your slides, and I think that they definitely added to your presentation. I definitely agree with both of your other judges on their comments as well. And I think that going forward, if you decide to implement some of those, I think that they will improve your presentations going forward. What questions might you have for the judges? And it can be about today. It can be about your two competitions tomorrow. Anything we can help you with?
Am I right that we should concentrate on the sources of information that we used, making our assumption, while making our model, and so on? Or this is not so essential during 10-minute presentation and 90-second presentation?
Remember that the 10-minute and the 90-second are focusing on ethics, and it's not that mentioning financial pieces and legal pieces aren't important, because usually there is an underpinning of any ethical argument in those two categories too. But in the 10 minutes, if I understand your question, all right, that the amount of financial and numerical data that you present can be cut considerably when you're talking about, when you're focusing just on the ethics piece. Anything else?
Thank you. Now I have the information we need.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Okay, excellent. Well, we really congratulate you on your very first IBEC experience, and again, triple welcome to you, because we're so glad to have Russia represented with us, and we hope that that you'll go back and talk about your positive experience at IBEC, and maybe we can form a long-term relationship with your school. At this point, if you don't have any other questions, I'm going to thank our judges and thank you to the team. Thank you to Michael, our technical support person who keeps the trains running on time, as we say in the US. And we wish you all the best in your two presentations tomorrow. And Michael, if you would let our students out for recess, then the three of us judges will sit for just a moment.
Thank you.